I'll start with I suppose, the typical. We might recognise that rock. Sorry.
Yeah, I get that.
This is of course the rock. This is of course the rock of Ushnock, and it's said that the druid Delvat fed his way up to this rock back in that early period of prehistory Ireland, and he cast out 7 rivers of fire. Each one of the 7 sons followed a river of fire, and they ended up in Delvin. So we have 7 Delvins in our little fair country, and Delvin we're in, of course, is Delvin Moor, and the Great Delvin. So that would have been obviously his oldest son would have took charge of the Great Delvin. So that's going back into our very prehistory and maybe where we came from. So if you're on the way to Clonyn via the Ballymore, you look to your right, you'll see the Festival of Fires. They have a large wicker basket out there, a major large wicker basket, and that's where we say we stem from anyway. We'll go with that. And I suppose the earliest settlement, and this is one Paul will be talking about later tonight, we feel would be Clonarney Church. We feel that there was a sort of 6th century monastic site there, and again this is what we're trying to prove now by the geophysical survey. So Paul will be talking a bit more in depth about Clonarney tonight, but that's what we believe to be the first sort of settlement in this area. The person we're looking at, the family we're looking at, of course, are the O'Findalons, or the O'Findalons, who were the chieftains at the time of the Great Delvin, and we feel that actually St. Bendel was one of these O'Findalons. So again, Paul will be into that in more detail. As I say, this is a quick introductory, just coming across about what's happened and how we've come to where we are today. This is the team from Galway. They were responsible for looking after that first piece of geophysical evidence that we're hoping it's all everything that this is going to turn out to be an early monastic site. They're coming back again, as Eamon was already saying, they're in April. I lead you then down the Ballyhealy Road to where the new housing estate there at Castle Court. Is it Castle Court here? Is it down the Ballyhealy Road there? Beside Clondone, yeah. The new part of it, when they were building the houses there, they came across this souterrain. Now, the souterrain is a place of shelter, and when they actually got into it, the area inside was bone dry, so it was well built. It was probably, the way they would have built it, they would have dug out the actual shape of the souterrain. They'd have then built the actual blocks, or the stone, and corbelled it, and then they would have backfilled in the clay on top of that. So the souterrain was a place for refuge, say in times of attack. So it might suggest that Delvin at some stage came under attack, and it would be probably, according to sources, it was pre-Norman. Now the fact that it was found down here in the Ballyhealy Road would suggest that there was settlement down here prior to the Normans coming. So there's this kind of theory that the Normans came, built their motte and bailey, and the village kind of stemmed up in around that. That's not to say that didn't happen, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this was here prior to the Normans, and therefore would suggest that there was activity, or definitely some people living in the area, and not all out of Clonarney as were the early part of the 6th century. Of course, the Anglo-Normans came then, and we have this, now it's very hard to see it now, but our first motte in Delvin was probably 1169, and they would have built their motte, and it's probably a wooden tower on top of that as their keep, and they would have had a bailey in around that. I suppose the best thing to show you is the next one there. Something like that. Okay, now obviously may not have had the moat as well running around for defensive purposes. It may not have had all these defensive purposes, and whether it looked as clinically clean as that little painting, it may not have done that either. But the fact was, this would represent something like what would have been there initially, before they decided to go into building stone castles. Because now, and if you think of it, this massive hill and this massive wooden tower on top of it would have been enough to put the shivers into the locals at the time, who were living in very timid conditions. So the new masters for definite were in around the place, and the Normans were truly here. So that's just a quick back to the motte here. So you can see it doesn't look as anything as impressive as that last painting, but then St Mary's Church. This is believed to be 14th century, which means it was built ahead of the stone castle. So what was probably happening was, when they were in the market, they actually started to build the church, maybe not so much as a church, but more as the first stone tower of refuge, and then it would have taken on the guise of a church. But initially it wouldn't have been set out to be a church. It would have been set out as a sort of a defensive purpose. And then, as time went on, they would have built the castle then. Because the castle itself, which is in the next slide, sorry, just to have a look at that. As you can see, sorry, from the church, over the ages, things have changed. And we went from sort of the neoclassical into the Gothic sort of architecture. You can see this, the way windows were blocked up. And, you know, there's a lot of changes took place over the years. It takes on more of a church-like appearance here than what it might have took on at the start. This again, as I say, was built in the 14th century, but all these adaptations would have happened later and later and later as it went along. And then, of course, we have the castle itself. So this is an artist's impression going back, I think, from the 1800s, that artist's impression. And the castle was built in the 15th century, and it takes on the look of a 13th century castle. So if you were to come in, look at the castle straight off, and you were one of these sort of people that would know castles, you'd say, yeah, that's definitely 13th century, so it was built sometime between 1200 and 1300. The fact was, it was built in the 15th century, but made to look like a 13th century castle. The same way as we build, we'd say, the like Clonyn Castle, which is a Gothic structure, and it was built well before the Gothic period, well after the Gothic period. Again, there's just a view of it today. It's a wee bit in ruins, obviously, and I think we did a tour here around Delvin where we actually went in on it, so, and you could see how sound the structure is inside. Like, you know, it's vaulted. The bottom, the ground floor is vaulted, and then you're actually up into the first floor. So actually, what would happen is on the ground floor would be the storage areas, and where you would have the main duties of cooking and all that would have went on, and the entrance was on the first floor. So you had a vault, and then you were onto the first floor, and that could be protected much more easier then. That was the idea of building that. But I think then, by the time this castle was built, they weren't so much in fear of the people of Delvin attacking them, but rather the clans from outside Delvin attacking them. And there's plenty of stories of raids coming through Delvin, and how the Nugents would have, on both sides, the Nugents were trying to repel and sometimes join in with the forces. And then we come to the, I suppose, 16th century, or 16th century would be at this time. And the reason this is 16th century, why they know this is 16th, well, again, why we think it's 16th century, it's very hard to see in this photograph, but you have a chimney rest here, and the chimney pots were turned at an angle, a skewed angle, and that, in the architectural world, suggests that it was 16th century. So the story is that the Nugents built this beautiful castle, and then Cromwell came on the scene in 1649, and he immediately burnt it to the ground and headed off to Galway. It was either that or to Hell or Connacht, and he took Connacht, which is probably much the same thing really, but he got down there anyway, and of course his castle was in ruins and no longer any good to Cromwell, so Cromwell headed off in another direction. We'd like to think, I think he did anyway. And when he came back, once they got reclaimed the lands, and they could reclaim the lands, he came back then and he built this beautiful house here onto the right, which would look more like what you would see in around the 18th century, that type of house, you know, large windows to let the light in, and as you can see the windows large on the bottom, and then gradually as they went up they got smaller and smaller to give that effect that they were actually growing in height, that the place was much taller than it was. So according to stories though, the good Lord Nugent at the time wasn't very house proud, and his towers were leaking and there was grime on the walls, and he didn't treat his wife quite the way he should have treated her. He locked her up, I think, in the said tower, a bit like what's that lady with the blonde hair? Rapunzel as such. And anyway, the story is that he locked her up there, and she gave birth to twins, and while she was pregnant he was away with prostitutes and various other, and so she was really peeved off with him about the whole thing, and divorced him as such. But she wrote damning letter about him, and it was kind of publicised as well. So something to remember about our good Delvin nobles. No, it's very noble, really. You know? So we move swiftly along. Then we're up out of that century. We're into the 19th century then, and I suppose I just took the map into it. As you can see, our church, the St Mary's Church, is here. And at this stage, this was around 1845. We'll be looking at the rectory. 1853, and the workhouse. So the church down here, the Roman Catholic Church, which is now the hall, that was in ruins at the time, so that was finished as a building as such, and the new church had been in place. We can just see the moat here, much more visible, and then St Mary's Church. Well, I suppose what we're really interested here in this part of the 19th century, of course, was the Union Workhouse, which was built in 1853. It was one of the last workhouses to be built in Ireland. So when we call it the famine area, we were just sort of on the fringes of the famine was over, and we eventually built this workhouse. So workhouses took on a bit different guise. They still managed to look after the poor and that, but they were kind of the crowd that ran this, the Board of Guardians. They were like a little political unit. Mr. Nugents and all the people that were wealthy people from around the area were part of that, so they kind of controlled what went on in Delvin, and especially around the areas and that. The burial ground, of course, was to the outside, which we now call the Famine Graveyard, but as I say again, the burial ground when they came with the workhouse, so again it was 1853. Quite a lot of stories now, but as I say, I'm rushing along because I'm trying to get through sort of a few centuries, and there's a picture into the Famine Graveyard, and I'm sure you'll all agree that it does need a serious attending to. So that was why that was one of the main purposes that we want to get done as well. And then we come to Clonyn Castle. So we went around from the castle here, from the motte to the castle, over then to the 16th century castle, then on to the 18th century house, and eventually to Clonyn Castle as we know it today. So I had to get in a tall tree to take that shot. But it's a lovely, it's a lovely castle. But what I didn't take that shot.
We didn't believe it.
But I suppose what I was trying to say is how we kind of we like to make things look old, and this is kind of important when I was talking about Ballinlough Castle. We like to make things look different than what they actually were. So this was built to resemble a Gothic castle, like a real fairy tale sort of castle. And this was the kind of, think about this, this was built around about, wasn't it, 18...
Was it supposed to be said was the church, wasn't it?
Down there. Okay, sorry,
sorry, no, wasn't it supposed to be around the same time as the church?
Yeah, it was around the same time as the church. I think, yeah, this one would have been.
Yes, yeah.
It would have been. So, money was plentiful at the time, and that's the key in this. There was plenty of money at the time, and we look at that again closer in the next one. Of course, St Patrick's Hall looks an awful lot better now. When he took that photograph one very early January morning.
Before and after.
Yeah, before, actually I was taking off the shot and kind of include that into it. But obviously that serves our church in Delvin. And I suppose if you look at that, it was in the lower end of the village, it was down low, and now we have this beautiful church, and it's in a prominent position, and that kind of stemmed the tide of what way religion went, the established religion that changed. Of course there she is there. I think it was classed as the jewel in the Meath diocese at the time it was built. It probably is still, because it's just such a fantastic. And now I'll be talking a bit more about this later, but I won't be talking about it too long. Ballinlough Castle. Again, another little gem. It's kind of hidden away, and no one really, you don't hear so much about it, because when people come into Delvin, they see the castle of Clonyn Castle there. But this one here is a real gem, and there's a great little bit of history to it as well. That's the full side of it, and as you can see, it changes over time as well, and we'll talk about that later. Again from the lake, and then of course our period houses, which will be around. That's Brackland House. We've been up there for a walk, and they would have sprang up as well in around the 17th century, 18th century. So we have plenty of, I suppose, between that, South Hill, even the like of Ballinlough, these places, these were all large estates. And then obviously Paul will talk about this man a bit more, because if anyone knows anything about this man, it's Paul. And that's a view inside Rossmead House, as it is now. So you know the picture of it, you can see it from the outset. Now, unfortunately, the reason about that in there, we were hoping Roger who was going to do Rossmead House tonight, but again he's not here, so such as we can't really talk about it.